The autopsy begins in a room choked with mahogany and unspoken resentment. The year is 1868. Sir Benjamin Guinness, the patriarch who turned black water into gold, is dead. His will is not a document, it is a verdict. For his sons, it is the final judgment from a man whose approval they chased their entire lives. Edward Cecil Guinness, the third son, sits apart. He is not the heir, that is Arthur. He is an afterthought, a beneficiary of a legacy he did not forge. The air is thick with the smell of old paper and the metallic tang of sibling rivalry. The lawyer's voice drones on, dissecting the empire, assigning value to land, to shares, to a life's work. Each word is a stone dropped into the silent well of the family's future. For Edward, this is the moment of his public branding. He will receive a fortune, yes, an obscene amount of money that could drown a lesser man. But it comes with a condition, an asterisk. He inherits wealth, but not the crown. This is not a gift. It is a challenge, a lifelong assignment to prove the dead patriarch wrong. The reading concludes. The room exhales, but Edward is holding his breath. The great Guinness curse is not one of accidents or madness. It is the curse of second place. Anatomy of a takeover. The inheritance was not a finish line, it was a starting gun. Edward and his older brother, Arthur, were given joint custody of the empire. A fragile peace. But empires are not ruled by committee. Edward's ambition, forged in the quiet humiliation of the will reading, began its cold and methodical work. This was not a fraternal partnership. It was a siege. He did not raise his voice. He simply raised the stakes. He poured his life into the black liquid, mastering the alchemy of hops and finance, while Arthur pursued politics and high society. The eventual split was an amputation disguised as a business deal. Edward paid his brother off, buying not just his shares, but the very soul of the company. He became the sole owner, the richest man in Ireland. Pause and the loneliest. His philanthropy was monumental, an attempt to build a legacy outside the brewery's shadow. The Iveagh Trust, the Guinness Trust. He built homes for the poor with the precision of a general planning a campaign, erecting walls of brick and mortar to contain the ghosts of his own ambition. He gifted his home and art to the nation, turning his private sanctuary into a public museum. A final act of gilded exile. He had won everything, the company, the title, the fortune. But the victory was hollow, echoing in the empty halls of his perfect, curated life. This was the true cost of the crown. Immense wealth plus public scrutiny equals a statistical certainty of tragedy. For every pound sterling earned, a pound of flesh was paid by someone in the family. Accidents that defied probability, sicknesses that seemed selective, scandals that erupted like black foam from a poorly poured stout. Edward watched this from the center of the storm. He was the quiet one, the builder. While other branches of the family provided fodder for tabloids, he constructed an empire of silence and efficiency. His marriage to his third cousin Adelaide was not a romance. Pause. It was a merger. A dynastic maneuver to keep the bloodline and the balance sheet pure. Their three sons were not just children. They were future assets, born into a gilded cage where the bars were made of expectation. His philanthropy, therefore, was not simple charity. It was an exorcism, an attempt to build a firewall of good deeds against the encroaching darkness that consumed his relatives. The Guinness Trust, the Iveagh Trust, these were not gifts. They were fortifications. Each brick laid for the poor in London and Dublin was a stone placed on the wall of his own legacy, hoping to keep the family ghosts out. He was the richest man in Ireland, a title that felt less like an achievement and more like a target. He poured money into housing and hospitals, a desperate attempt to outrun the fate that whispered in the quiet halls of his mansions. But the curse is patient. It doesn't care about balance sheets. A man who can buy anything fears only one thing, oblivion or worse, to be remembered only for the bitter black liquid that made his fortune. Edward Guinness's final act was not one of business, but of legacy, laundering on an industrial scale. He would not be just a brewer. He would be a benefactor, a patron, a name carved into stone, not just etched onto a bottle. The Iveagh Trust was his masterpiece of social engineering. He poured concrete over the festering slums of Dublin, creating clean, orderly housing. It was a transaction. He gave them homes. They gave him a clean conscience, a fair trade. Then came the ultimate acquisition, pause, immortality. He bequeathed his London residence, Kenwood House, and its staggering art collection to the nation. The Iveagh Bequest. He didn't just collect Vermeer and Rembrandt. He collected permanence. Each brushstroke was a vote for his salvation, a silent testament to his taste. A world away from the noise of the brewery in 1919, the transaction was complete. He became the Earl of Iveagh, a title purchased with a river of stout and a mountain of good deeds, the final branding. But the last years were quiet. The empire was a self-sustaining machine. The trusts were managed by others. The art hung silently on the walls, indifferent to its owner. He was an old man in a palace of his own making, surrounded by the ghosts of his ambition. When he died in 1927, the posthumous audit began. The estate was valued in the millions. The name was secured in museums and public works. But the man himself, a silhouette against a foggy London sky, forever defined by the empire he built and the darkness he tried so desperately to outrun. The anatomy of his wealth was simple: black water, roasted barley, and the thirst of an empire. But the profits left a residue, a stain that even the finest Savile Row suit could not conceal. Edward Giniss, now Lord Evan, looked out upon the squalor of London and Dublin and saw not just human misery. He saw a ledger that was dangerously unbalanced, an inventory of sins that required a monumental correction. This was not charity. It was a transaction. His attempt to build a firewall against the family curse using brick and mortar. The Guinness Trust, the Iveagh Trust. These were not mere philanthropic gestures. They were concrete incantations against fate. He would pour millions into clean, solid housing for the very people his class preferred to ignore. Over 2,000 homes in London, another 1,000 in Dublin. He was building a new kind of empire, one of stone and sanitation, hoping its sheer weight could anchor his soul and protect his lineage from the tragic undertow that had claimed so many others. Each new building was a brick laid on the tomb of his anxieties, a fortress of philanthropy. But the shadow of the Guinness curse was long, and it cared little for the price of real estate. He was the richest man in Ireland, buying salvation at wholesale prices. The question was whether it was truly for sale. In the end, the richest man in Ireland died, October 1927. The ticker tapes reported the death of an industrial titan, the fall of an Earl. But the truth was quieter, colder. A life spent accumulating, building, and donating had reached its final entry. A posthumous audit was now underway. His estate was valued at Pa's £13.5 million, an almost fictional sum. It was a bitter testament, a mountain of gold that could not purchase one more breath. He left behind a dynasty, an earldom and trusts that would outlive nations. He bequeathed Kenwood House and its priceless art collection to the public, turning his private sanctuary into a museum, a digital tomb for his taste. It was his final grand gesture, an attempt to secure immortality through the Iveagh Bequest. But what of the man Edward Cecil Guinness, the third son who outmaneuvered his brothers, the titan who tried to pave over his family's tragic legacy with public works? The silence in the halls of his many mansions was the final verdict. He had built an empire of beer, a fortress of charity, and a museum of art, but the curse he fought was not external. It was in the bloodline, and all the gold in the world was just gilded ballast on a ship already destined to sink. The final entry in the ledger is always written in the same ink, the ink of silence. For Edward Cecil Guinness, 1st Earl of Iveagh, that entry was dated October 7th, 1927. The richest man in Ireland was dead. His personal fortune, a figure that defied easy comprehension, was inventoried at over £11 million sterling, a king's ransom, converted into a sterile number on a probate document, smelling of dust and legal finality. The empire of black liquid he commanded was secure, a global behemoth churning out profit day and night. His name was etched onto the stone of public buildings, a permanent fixture in the civic landscapes of London and Dublin. He had done everything a man with infinite resources could do to cheat oblivion. He built a fortress of philanthropy against the coming night, brick by calculated brick. But the family curse is not a financial liability to be offset by charitable donations. It is a genetic ghost, a specter passed down with the family silver and the burden of the name. Edward had watched it consume others, a quiet horror story playing out in the drawing rooms of the elite. He had spent a lifetime building walls to keep it out. The Guinness Trust, the Iveagh Trust, Kenwood House, gifted to the nation as a perfectly curated mausoleum for his art. Each was a block of concrete and good intentions, a desperate attempt at atonement. He wasn't just giving away money, he was conducting a transaction with fate itself. He was trying to buy a clean exit, a different destiny than the one that seemed pre-written for his bloodline. The public narrative was a flawless victory. A captain of industry who became a saint of social housing. A titan who remembered the common man. Newspapers printed hagiographies, eulogies thick with praise. The nation mourned the loss of its great benefactor. But inside the gilded cage of the dynasty, the air remained thin, pressurized. The inheritance was not just the breweries and the bank accounts. It was the weight, the expectation, the shadow that clung to the name Guinness, a darkness that no amount of light from a Rembrandt or a Vermeer could fully dispel. His 3 sons inherited the throne, the title, the unimaginable wealth. They also inherited the target on its back. The machinery of the curse had not been dismantled, merely serviced for the next generation. This was his final, grandest project, the architecture of his own immortality. He traded liquid gold for solid stone. He converted profit into public works. He hoped the sheer weight of his good deeds would anchor his legacy, preventing it from being swept away by the same tide of tragedy, scandal, and madness that had claimed so many of his kin. His life became a posthumous audit, meticulously prepared for a final judgment he could never witness. He left behind a legacy of impeccable taste and calculated generosity. An earldom, a collection of masterpieces, homes for the poor. It was a masterpiece of reputation management, a firewall against the fires of history. But the silence that followed his death was profound. It was the silence of a closed account, the silence of a game played to its conclusion, where the final score remains forever sealed. Did he balance the scales, or did he simply build a more beautiful, more expensive coffin? The verdict is not found in the archives or the financial statements. It hangs in the quiet, empty rooms of his palaces, a question mark made of dust and echoes. The empire was immortal. The man was not.